Welcome to the Faith and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Elle Edwards, mental health champion, positive psychology geek, and founder of the Faith and Business Playground. Join me each week as I talk openly about mental health, the dark side of entrepreneurism, and bring you Bible-friendly tools, support, and resources to help you heal from depression so you can actually be as happy as you think you should be. In today's episode of the podcast, this is episode number 1 of 3, where we're talking about those upgrades. So if you followed along a couple of episodes ago, I introduced this idea of upgrading. When you've got to the point where you've realized that something needs to change, you're not happy, you've had enough, and you're fed up of being fed up all the time, and you realize that something needs to change, that's when we start thinking about those upgrades. That's what I introduced a couple of episodes ago. And I did promise then that I would do 3 separate episodes on the 3 different aspects. And like I said at the time, these are things that I work with people one-on-one on. So if as you're listening, if you're feeling like, oh my goodness, that's really overwhelming, like how would I do this? And you've got questions, but about making it specific to you, or if you're like, oh yeah, that sounds great, but I know I won't do it. And what if this and all that sort of stuff. Be reassured that you don't have to do this work on your own. My goal with the podcast always, because I can't, there's billions of people on the planet. And even if I was only to reach 1% of those people with the podcast, which I don't do that many yet, but there's only one of me. I can't physically work with one-on-one with every single person. I'd love this podcast to grow and to reach thousands of people. I can't work one-on-one with thousands of people at the same time. So my goal with the podcast always is to present you with ideas and things that you can try and stuff that you can do and that you can try for yourself. Because sometimes we can do this work for ourselves. It depends how far down the hole we've got, I guess, as well. But sometimes, we can do it ourselves. Or we can describe some of what we're doing to someone who we trust, and we can get support that way. However, what I would feel compelled to remind you is, if as you're listening, you're like, yeah, that sounds great, but I really need some one-on-one help with this. I want to work with somebody. There is an option for that. The best way to find out more about that, to find out if we're a good fit more than anything as well, because I know I'm lovely and you're lovely, but I'm not lovely for everybody. So if the best way to find out if it's a good fit and get a sense of what that looks like is to sign yourself up for a Sadness Slayer session. And to do that, you need to go to faithandbusinessplayground.com/talk. There is more information on that page, but there's also, more importantly, there's a little box where you can pick a time and it'll get you directly onto my calendar. Okay. So with that little bit said, in today's episode, we are thinking about upgrading your skills. And I put inverted commas around that word skills, because it's not skills in the traditional sense of, writing skills or reading skills, but it is stuff that you can practice. And the reason why we do this piece first, and I introduce this piece first when I'm working one-on-one with people, is because it's the most concrete part. And it's probably in that regard the easiest part to start with. I should preface that by saying as well, if you haven't already done the Perfect Ordinary Day exercise that I introduced a couple of episodes ago, I would encourage you to do that as well. Giving you lots of homework today, aren't I? But the benefit, and for that, I'm just giving you the big picture of what this would look like if we were to do this one-on-one. The very first thing I would have you do is that clarity piece, because it's all well and good going, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to try that and la la la. But without the clarity around what it is you actually want things to look like, and without knowing where it is you want to go, it becomes really difficult to actually make that advice specific to you. So that's why I'm reminding you, if you haven't done that Perfect Ordinary Day exercise, go back and do it. I'm going to look back at my notes now while I'm talking to just check which episode number it is. Because if you haven't done it, you might be thinking, yeah, that's great, I need to do it, but I don't know where it is. Let's have a look, see. Okay, yeah, that's episode 112. So it was 2 episodes ago. if you haven't listened to that, you can get that if you go to faithandbusinessplayground.com/FAB, F for Freddy, A for Alpha, B for Bertie, Faith and Business, faithandbusinessplayground.com/FAB112, because it was episode 112. That's the way these episodes work, since I changed the numbering to make it easier. So if you haven't done that, go back and do it, and then come back to this one. Okay, so I'm going to assume, therefore, that you've done the perfect day exercise, or perfect ordinary day exercise. That bit's important. You'll find out more about that in that episode. I'm assuming you've done that exercise. You've got a better sense of where it is you want to go. So with that said, the next piece then is to start thinking about upgrading your skills. And like I say, in today's episode, I'm going to introduce 3 things that you can start doing right away. And then in next episode, we're going to be talking about your environment, and then we're going to be thinking about upgrading your thinking after that. With the caveat that when we do get to upgrade your thinking, it's a lot of stuff to cover, and we won't be able to cover all of it in one episode, but I'll do my best. Anyway, upgrading your skills. So I've got 3 things I want to introduce you to today. 2 of these things at least, no, all of these things I have touched upon in previous episodes, but I haven't put them under this umbrella of upgrading your skills or giving you that wider context for why it's important. So that's why I mentioned it today. The very first one is my 3-word hack for helping you be a silver lining spotter. Because it doesn't matter, I believe, it doesn't matter how far down the hole you are right now. If you can start practicing using this 3-word hack, you will be amazed how quickly you can start to turn things around, which is why this is one of the first things I introduce, because it's a really easy one. And I have to thank my friend Morag, because literally I've been practicing silver lining spotting for years now. I do it without even thinking about it. But it wasn't until she and I had a conversation in a Facebook group in a business training course that she and I did together in May or June last year, that I actually finally identified the 3 words that do it. So I always thank my friend Morag for this. She's the queen of questions. And thanks to one of her questions, I was like, oh, that's how I do it. Those 3 words are but at least. So I want you to imagine yourself in a situation where something has happened that's not great. And then that thing has happened, but at least. And then see what your brain comes up with. Now, when you first start to do this, it's going to feel challenging. You're going to feel like, oh, those are really stupid reasons. But the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. That's because of another quirk of your brain, the reticular activating system, that I will talk about another time. Or you may have heard me talk about it before. It's that yellow car thing, as my friend Angela's husband calls it. That yellow car thing that Elle goes on about. Yes, it's the reticular activating system. So the more you do things, and the more you consciously practice things, the easier it becomes. So don't worry if the very first few times you try this, it feels difficult or false, or if the reasons you come up with are stupid, right? It doesn't matter, because you're doing one of 2 things, or even both things. You're interrupting that pattern, it's called pattern interrupt. So even if the thing you come up with is really silly, it sort of jolts your brain and then stops you spiraling downwards. But the other thing as well is you come up with it, and it potentially helps you realize that maybe it's not as horrific and as terrible as you thought it was. And so I did this. My daughter, early in the year, she was having a particularly bad week. And so I got her to try it, and it worked. And this is a 14-year-old who struggles with anxiety, who is a typical teenager, and all the stereotypes around teenagers. She was having that kind of week. And so I maintain that if it can work with my 14-year-old, it can work for you if you give it a go. So that's the very first little skill that I want you to start practicing. Is but at least. It's that 3-word hack, but at least. So, for example, I went out this morning with the dogs, and I got absolutely soaking wet. It was so wet I had to put all my clothes in the tumble dryer apart from my underwear. I'm not even exaggerating. But at least it was a day when I didn't need to go anywhere else. I wasn't expected to be anywhere with my hair looking nice and with a presentable face on. I could wander around I did put some extra layers on, otherwise it'd be freezing cold, but I could wander around in not all of my clothes while they dried in the tumble dryer. Okay, so it's a silly example for you, but it's a true example from something that happened this morning. Okay, so try it for yourself and see how you get on. And if you have questions around it, if you are a member of the Faith and Business Playground, come on over and ask, and we can chat about it if there are specifics. But like I say, if you want to do that one-on-one, that's an option for you as well. The second skill, again in inverted commas, I want to introduce you to is this idea of a thankful list. Now, if you're rolling your eyes at me for a minute, I understand. We're told, oh yeah, gratitude, thankfulness is really important. It's yet another thing to do. No. I mean, yes, it is another thing to do. However, I would challenge you that you could bring this daily practice of finding things that you're thankful for into your day relatively easy and relatively quickly. If you've already got a copy of my Win the Week planner, which if you haven't, you can get it for free. My Win the Week planner, I start, 3 things that I'm thankful for today. And sometimes I write down really stupid stuff. It depends how early in the day. Ideally, I do this before I actually get started with the work day. But sometimes life happens and I do it a little bit later. And so sometimes the only things I can write down are the sun is shining, coffee, and I had a good sleep. And logically, I'm thinking, well, how on earth is that going to make anything better? That's so stupid. But by taking just a few seconds to focus, okay, what's good right now? It trains your brain to help identify more of the same. It filters in more examples and it becomes easier over time. So if you're not already using some sort of thankful list, I would encourage you to start doing so. And like I say, if you haven't got a planner that you already like, you can get my Win the Week planner as part of the Happily Ever After goal setting book. So drop me a message. I can tell you more about that or send you links and stuff. I'm not going to mention it now because if I give out too many links, you're listening along and haven't got a pen, it's tricky then. But it is a practice that, even though I know logically it sounds silly, it has a real science-based reason for why it works. And the Bible is full of examples of give thanks, be thankful, think lovely thoughts, all that sort of stuff. So it's biblical too. The last thing I have for you for today in terms of upgrading your skills is what I'm calling happiness hits. Now, this stems back to some of the work that Sean Aker introduced us to in his book, The Happiness Advantage. There's loads of science in that book, but my favorite experiment, and it's one you might have heard me talk about before or tell you about before, where they had some trainee doctors and they were being tested on how quickly and how accurately they could diagnose a patient. And they did a test. And so they gave the control group weren't given anything, but then the test subjects were given a happiness hit. They primed them for happiness. And the doctors or the trainee doctors who were primed for happiness diagnosed quicker and more accurately. But what I find fascinating is what they used to prime them for happiness. And it was a lollipop, like a candy on a stick for our American friends, a lollipop. They gave them a lollipop. And as a result of a lollipop, they were able to diagnose more accurately and more quickly. So they weren't being primed for happiness with really big stuff. The reminder for us, therefore, is that we don't need to it doesn't need to be big stuff. And so what I want you to do in terms of this last one, in terms of upgrading your skills, I want you to think about what the lollipop example is for you, because you might not particularly like lollipops, although a random lollipop out of the blue might make you go, oh, that's nice. But I want you to start thinking about what are those things that make you go, oh, that's lovely, surprising, delightful, tiny little things. And then what can you do to give yourself more of those happiness hits off and on throughout the day? And it helps to have a collection of them as well. And this does tie into upgrading your thinking that we're going to be talking about in a couple of episodes' time, but it doesn't matter. Those little happiness hits, those little things that make you smile. They don't have to be food related. I know they use lollipops, but it's probably good to have some things that make you smile that aren't necessarily food related. Otherwise, your waistline will expand, and that might make you feel a bit sad. So it could be counterproductive. But think about what those things are for you, and then consider what can you do to bring more of those into your day, particularly from a practical note. Particularly if you're about to do something challenging or tricky or something that you want to do really well at. Because if if the research in Sean's book is correct, and if by priming our brains, giving ourselves those happiness hits, helps us perform better, it makes perfect sense to me that if there is something that is particularly important to you, that is the time to actually give yourself that happiness hit. Okay? Like I say, give these 3 things a try. Bucket list, thankful list, happiness hits. Give them a try. Let me know how you get on. But if you do want to do some of this work one-on-one, if you want some help with this, we can dig into it more deeply, and you can get specialized, specific support for you and get your specific questions answered. That's where the one-on work comes in. So reminder of the URL that you need to go to sign up for the Sadness Slayer session. It is faithandbusinessplayground.com/talk. Okay, excellent. In the meantime, as ever, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Tune in to the next episode where we're going to be talking about upgrading your environment. And this is a fun one. And it might surprise you, some of the things. I often surprise myself when I start talking about this stuff for reasons that I will explain in the next one. But you're going to have to wait for that. That's on Tuesday. Anyway, thank you for being here. I shall catch up with you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.